My name is Senzeni Marasela. I come from Soweto in South Africa. I live in Soweto by choice because for me, it's my playground. It's a place where all is possible, especially with my work. I'm intensely interested in performance work, in the boundaries between what can be imagined and lived experience. It's a township that has been in existence since the early 1900s. I'm very interested in the history of Soweto. And also interested in the possibilities that it gives me as a performance artist, to realize my work. So I see it as my playground, as a place to live. Also as an archive for me, as a historical archives. Because there's so many people there who have the history of Soweto and who remember it. And I can always make journeys outside of Soweto. As I am now, I'm the first recipient of the K21 Global Art Award, an award that I'm very grateful for, and also for the platform that it gives me. And, the stage to realize things that I had put aside, that I thought were not possible, I thought I could not do, because as artists, we go through many processes of self-editing, of abandoning ideas, of rejecting ideas that we otherwise should be performing. The K21 for me, I hope, is going to be a time of collaboration, will allow me to have access to many artists, to see other artists' work, especially here in Germany as well. So I look forward to collaborations around the award. The waiting for Kebane starts a little bit earlier than when I put on the dress. In 2002, I was in Amsterdam, and I watched this is before I go to Amsterdam, actually. I watched Jim Comes to Joburg, called The African Jim. It's a movie that was made in more than 60 years ago in Johannesburg, about a man who travels to Johannesburg from the rural villages, comes to Joburg, and he has all these idealistic dreams about being in the city. He ends up getting mugged. But in the end, he wants to pursue justice. He recognizes the people that mugged him and beat him up as he's performing. I was so, because I'd never seen it in my country, that movie, I was so compelled to begin to tell the story of Theodora, my mother, because I'd done so loosely before. Then I began the first installation of the work, where I put on a yellow dress. It was called Theodora Comes to Joburg. So in this work, I went around areas that my mother remembered about coming to Joburg in the 60s when she first got married to my mother. These would have been very iconic places all the way to Soweto and around Johannesburg. And because performance work is something that happens in the moment, there was also a struggle to document, because at the time I really didn't want to be followed by a video. I still don't, and also because my performances tend to be quite durational. They're long, and I'm also interested in blurring the borders between lived experience and performance work as an artist. So I live out my performances. The red dress comes in 2013. After I'd read a book, The Cry of Winnie Mandela by Njabulo Ndebele. He writes about these 4 women who wait for their husbands to return from whichever situation they went. But because all of them are so traumatized by waiting, they end up having an imaginary conversation with Winnie Mandela, who waited 27 years for Nelson Mandela to return. But she waited very publicly and very painfully as well. and often humiliated during that wait. But they see her as a symbol of strength, as someone who waited like a soldier on her legs, fighting through that waiting. It inspired then this work that is here, to do the second installation, because the first was Theodora Comes to Joburg. The second one was to take up this dress and reimagine Theodora and the journey of waiting, which is very common in my country, and in the continent as well, of these women who are left behind. But then Theodora is not poor. I choose not to make her poor in my performance. She is a teacher. She gives up her job to go and pursue Kebane in the city and waits for him. But then the journey then takes on self-discovery while that wait is happening. I think one of the struggles for a lot of us who do performance work is residues of that performance. What do we leave behind besides a video? Because it's a medium that I don't want to use for my own performance. So I don't want to leave copies of videos, not at the moment. So at that time when I was producing this work and living in this dress, and I traveled on it quite extensively as well. Came to the Venice Biennale several times in New York, traveled around the country in South Africa with it on. Went through various experiences, and some of them were very traumatic, because I didn't expect people to treat me that way. But then it got to a point where I realized that wherever I went outside of Soweto, I carried the look of poverty for most people. Because then I was offered food, money, clothes, help. People wanted to intervene on my behalf. And as soon as I speak, I became someone else. And then I think because a lot of the times when I was doing this performance, there were so many times when I was fragile. Because of the way that I was treated, whether people were very verbal about their disapproval, or they just simply ignored me, as they did in many dinner parties that I attended. So these works here on Thread were works about that fragility of waiting, this idea that most of the time I was not seen. It's fragile, it's if you'd like, almost not complete, because it's a story that's neither here nor there. It's a story that I still need to find ways of completing it. The story of Theodora, because now we're preparing for the next chapter of Theodora, with the next lot of dresses, and the next set of performance work that I'm going to do, which is different from the first two. Because I had 38 dresses, and then I had these shows. Earlier on in the performance, I'd wear them around my waist and my shoulders. It's a marker of status that, and people would treat you in a particular way in my society once they see you dressed in this way. I think after some time, because I also had to remain Senzeni throughout the performance, work, earn a living, it became quite difficult to negotiate wearing these blankets and trying to travel in them as well. That 2 years into the performance, I had to retire the blankets, so that I could travel much easier and not being stopped at borders and being asked if do I have asylum papers when I have a passport, or whether I was trying to sell stuff. Because my suitcases would be quite large because of these shoals. And so when I retired them, going back to the book, The Cry of Winnie Mandela and Jabulo, one of the characters, the husband, travels to go and work in the mines. This is a way in which a lot of black young men left villages and never returned, was to go and work in the mines. And women that were left behind, and many like Theodora who followed them to Johannesburg, or wherever they went to become mine laborers. We're left with the burden of these mines, the excessive burden of these mines. Are left with children. Many of these men never send money back home. Created a new level of poverty of these women who were married but single mothers, whose families were fragmented by the mines. Because men were not allowed to have families with them in the mines. They lived in single cell hostels for years, and they could go home once a year or twice, or when they were sick or in retirement. So you have all these distant relationships, that happened because of forced economic migration. So these shoals are, I guess, were a response to the burdens that women would have had to carry because of the family that was fragmented by mining in South Africa. I made them heavy by putting wool on them. So when you lift them, they have weight, they're quite heavy. Continue to work in red because for me, I use the color red as a symbol of protest, a symbol of marking particular times in South African history that affect both me personally and many other women as well.